In this extraordinary tale, witness the remarkable journey of a broken spirit transformed by unconditional love. When a young dreamer named Emma discovers a severely neglected horse at a livestock auction, destined for a tragic fate, she makes a decision that will change both their lives forever. Against all odds, their incredible bond leads them to achievements that leave the equestrian world in awe. This is a story of faith, determination, and the magical connection between a girl who dared to dream and a horse that everyone else had given up on. The autumn wind whipped through the weathered wooden beams of Cedar Creek Livestock Auction, carrying with it the mingled scents of hay, leather, and destiny. The late September morning had dawned crisp and clear in rural Montana, where the majestic Rocky Mountains stood sentinel against the horizon, their peaks already dusted with the first hints of winter snow. Inside the sprawling auction complex, an atmosphere of barely contained chaos reigned. Seasoned ranchers in well-worn boots strode purposefully between the holding pens, their experienced eyes evaluating each animal with calculated precision. The air hummed with the quiet murmur of deal-making, punctuated by the occasional sharp whinny of a nervous horse or the metallic clang of a gate being secured. The main auction ring buzzed with activity as prime horses were paraded before eager buyers. A magnificent palomino pranced through the sawdust-covered arena, its golden coat gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Starting bid at 5,000, the auctioneer's rapid-fire voice rang out, his words dancing through the air like leaves caught in an autumn breeze. Hands shot up around the room as the price climbed steadily higher. Yet far from this center stage of commerce, in a forgotten corner of the complex where shadows gathered like old memories, stood a pen that most people hurried past without a second glance. Inside, a dark bay horse stood motionless, its head hanging low, its once proud frame reduced to little more than skin stretched painfully over protruding bones. Deep scars marked its dull coat, telling silent stories of neglect and hardship. "That one's headed for the kill pen," a gruff voice remarked, as two men paused briefly beside the enclosure. "Won't even waste time trying to auction it. Look at those legs. Probably can't even carry its own weight properly." His companion nodded in agreement, already turning away. "Shame, but that's business. Some horses just aren't worth saving." The horse didn't even lift its head at their voices, as though it had long since accepted its fate. Its eyes, once bright with spirit, now stared vacantly at the straw-covered ground. The occasional tremor ran through its emaciated frame. Whether from weakness or the bitter morning cold, it was impossible to tell. In stark contrast to this scene of despair, the auction's main office buzzed with activity. Margaret Chen, the facilities owner, surveyed the day's listings with satisfaction. "We've got some excellent stock today," she remarked to her assistant, shuffling through papers covered in neatly typed entries. "That palomino from the Davidson Ranch will fetch a pretty penny, and there's a promising young quarter horse coming up next." The regular buyers filled the bleachers surrounding the main ring, professional trainers in pressed shirts and polished boots, ranch owners looking to expand their working stock, and wealthy hobbyists seeking their next show prospect. They studied their catalogs intently, marking potential purchases and calculating maximum bids. Outside, more trailers continued to arrive, kicking up clouds of dust as they pulled into the already crowded parking area. The sound of hooves on metal ramps echoed across the yard as more horses were unloaded and led to their temporary holding pens. The air was thick with anticipation of deals to be made and profits to be had. Yet fate had something different in mind that day, as 17-year-old Emma Sullivan sat in her father's old pickup truck, gripping a cream-colored envelope containing her life savings. 5 years of birthday money, earnings from summer jobs, and careful penny pinching had amounted to just over $2,000. It wasn't much in the world of horse trading, but to Emma, it represented something far more valuable: the chance to finally make her dream of horse ownership come true. "Remember what we talked about," her father, Jack, said quietly from the driver's seat. His weathered face, lined from years of working their small family farm, held a mixture of concern and resignation. Don't let your heart run away with your head. We can't afford vet bills for a problem horse, and your mother will have my hide if I let you bring home something dangerous. Emma nodded, but her blue eyes were already scanning the pens eagerly. She'd grown up helping with the neighbors' horses, mucking stalls and exercising their show jumpers in exchange for lessons. Years of reading every horse book she could find and watching countless training videos had prepared her for this moment. Or so she thought. What she couldn't have known was that fate had orchestrated this precise moment, bringing together a girl with an untested dream and a horse with a broken spirit, setting the stage for a journey that would defy every expectation and challenge every assumption about what was possible when love and determination collided with destiny. Emma's boots crunched on the gravel as she made her way through the maze of pens, her father following close behind. The main auction was in full swing, and most potential buyers crowded the central arena, leaving the back areas nearly deserted. A cool breeze carried the sound of the auctioneer's rapid-fire calls, punctuated by the occasional slam of a metal gate. Her heart sank slightly as she passed pen after pen of horses well beyond her modest budget. A gleaming chestnut with perfect conformation pranced nervously, its price tag already marked at 5 figures. A sturdy paint horse dozed in the morning sun, its owner discussing terms with a serious-looking trainer in a pressed shirt and polished boots. Maybe we should head back to the main ring, Jack suggested, checking his watch. The lower-priced lots will be starting soon. But Emma barely heard him. Something had caught her attention. A subtle movement in a shadowy corner where the morning light barely reached. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, she changed direction, moving away from the bustle of the main auction area. "Emma," her father called, "that's the kill pen section. There's nothing but trouble back there." His words faded into the background. As Emma approached a pen set apart from the others, inside stood a horse that made her heart stop. The animal was in terrible condition, ribs protruding sharply beneath a dull coat, head hanging low, with visible scars marking its dark bay. But something about its presence struck Emma deeply. Despite its deteriorated state, there was a ghostly echo of nobility in its bearing, like a fallen king who still remembered his crown. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping closer to the pen. The horse's ears flicked slightly at her voice, the first sign that it was aware of its surroundings. As she drew nearer, it slowly raised its head, and Emma found herself looking into eyes that seemed to hold entire worlds of untold stories. "Don't waste your time, girl," a gruff voice cut through the moment. A heavy-set man in a stained coverall approached, shaking his head. "That one's not even going to auction. Straight to the meat buyer. Previous owner abandoned him at the gates last night. No papers, no history, nothing but trouble." Emma's throat tightened. What happened to him? The man shrugged. "Who knows? Probably some backyard breeder's failed project. Look at that shoulder. Old injury for sure. And those legs. Bet he can barely carry himself, let alone a rider. Best thing for him now is a quick end." He turned away, already dismissing both horse and girl from his mind. But Emma couldn't move. The horse was looking directly at her now, its gaze carrying neither hope nor despair, just a quiet dignity. That struck her to her core. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand toward the fence. The horse flinched initially, but then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it took a single step forward. "Emma," her father's voice was gentle but firm behind her. "I know that look. But honey, this isn't a fairy tale. That horse needs thousands in vet bills just to have a chance at survival." "He's still fighting, Dad," Emma whispered, not taking her eyes off the horse. "Look at him. Everyone's given up, but he's still fighting." As if in response to her words, the horse took another tentative step forward, its movement careful but deliberate. Despite its obvious weakness, there was something in its stance that spoke of an unbroken spirit. A commotion from the main arena drew her father's attention. The lower-priced lots were beginning. Come on, he urged. If you still want a chance at buying something today, we need to go now. But Emma couldn't leave. In that moment, looking into those eyes that had seen so much hardship yet retained a flicker of life, she knew with absolute certainty that her entire life had been leading to this moment. Every penny saved, every extra chore worked, every dream of owning a horse, it had all been preparation for this exact encounter. "How much?" she asked, turning to face the yard worker who was still within earshot. "How much for him?" "The fur." Man turned back, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Girl, you're not hearing me. This ain't a sale horse. He's scheduled for the meat truck tomorrow morning. Even if you wanted him, which would be crazy, he ain't worth the hay it'd take to feed him." Emma stood straighter, channeling a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Everything has a price. How much?" The worker looked from Emma to her father, who stood with a mixture of pride and resignation on his face, then back to the horse. "Your funeral, kid. 500, and he's yours. But don't come crying when you realize what a mistake you've made." Emma's hand was already reaching for the envelope in her pocket, her fingers trembling slightly as she counted out the bills. Behind her, her father sighed deeply but made no move to stop her. He recognized the look in his daughter's eyes, the same determination her mother had shown all those years ago when she decided their small farm was worth saving despite the bank's warnings. As Emma handed over the money, the horse watched. The exchange with an awareness that seemed to defy its broken-down appearance. In that moment, though neither human nor horse could know it, an extraordinary journey was about to begin. One that would prove that sometimes the greatest champions aren't bought with gold, but with faith, and that destiny often wears a disguise of despair. The reality of Emma's decision hit hard in the harsh light of the afternoon sun. Loading the horse into their modest trailer proved to be the first of many challenges. The narrow metal ramp might as well have been a mountain to the weakened animal, who stood trembling at its base, eyes wide with fear. "Easy now," Emma murmured, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. The horse's reaction to the trailer suggested a history she was only beginning to imagine. Every attempt to move forward was met with a violent flinch, his legs shaking with each step. Behind her, she could hear the murmurs of other auction-goers watching the scene unfold. "That girl's in way over her head," someone commented, not bothering to lower their voice. Another chimed in, "That horse won't last a month. Waste of $500 if you ask me." Emma forced herself to block out their words, focusing entirely on the frightened animal before her. Jack Sullivan watched his daughter with a mixture of concern and pride. He'd seen that determined set to her jaw before, the same expression she'd worn when learning to ride their neighbor's most difficult pony, the one that had thrown every other child who dared to mount it. Still, this was different. This wasn't just about riding. This was about saving a life. After nearly an hour of patient coaxing, the horse finally took his first tentative step onto the ramp. Each subsequent step was a battle against fear and weakness, but Emma remained by his side, her quiet encouragement never ceasing. When he finally stood inside the trailer, his sides heaving with exertion, Emma felt tears of relief stinging her eyes. The drive home was tense. Every bump in the road caused the trailer to shudder, and Emma could hear the horse struggling to maintain his balance. They had to stop twice to let him rest, the short journey stretching into a 3-hour ordeal. By the time they turned onto the gravel road leading to their small farm, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Their neighbor, Dr. Sarah Chen, was already waiting by the barn. The veteran veterinarian had agreed to come by as a favor to the Sullivans, though her expression turned grave when the trailer door opened. The horse had barely managed to stay standing during the journey, and now he swayed dangerously as Emma attempted to lead him down the ramp. "Oh, Emma," Dr. Chen breathed, taking in the horse's condition. "When your father called, I didn't expect." She trailed off, already reaching for her medical bag. The next hour was a blur of examinations and assessments, each revelation worse than the last. Severe malnutrition, multiple old injuries, Possible organ damage from prolonged starvation. The list seemed endless. The good news, Dr. Chen said finally, peeling off her latex gloves, is that I don't see any immediate life-threatening conditions. The bad news. She paused, looking at Emma with sympathy. Is that rehabilitation, if it's even possible, will be a long and expensive journey. We're talking months of specialized care, carefully managed feeding to avoid refeeding syndrome, potential complications we can't even see yet. Emma stood stroking the horse's neck, which was still caked with dirt and tangles. What are his chances? She asked, her voice small but steady. Dr. Chen sighed. Honestly, 50-50 at best. And that's assuming everything goes perfectly and no complications arise. Emma, you need to understand. This isn't going to be like the horses you've helped train before. This boy has been through trauma we can only guess at. Physical recovery is just part of the battle. From the barn doorway, Margaret Sullivan watched her daughter with concern. She hadn't said much when Jack called to warn her about their new arrival. But now, seeing the reality of the situation, she couldn't stay silent. Emma, honey, maybe we should consider. No. Emma's response was immediate and firm. I know what you're going to say, but I made a promise to him. He stayed alive this long for a reason. I won't give up on him now. The horse shifted, slightly, turning his head to look at Emma with those eyes that had first captured her heart. In the fading daylight, they seemed to hold a question, as if he too wondered whether this girl's faith in him was justified. Well, Dr. Chen said, packing up her supplies, if you're determined to do this, you need to know what you're getting into. He'll need small, frequent meals, no more than tiny portions every few hours to start. His teeth will need attention once he's stronger. Daily monitoring of vital signs, careful exercise, rehabilitation once he's stable enough. I'll write everything down for you. Emma nodded, already mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. She had exactly $1,500 left from her savings. Money that would now have to stretch to cover medicine, special feed, and whatever other supplies they'd need. Her plans for new riding boots and a show saddle evaporated, replaced by lists of medical supplies and supplement costs. As darkness settled over the farm, Emma worked by lantern light to make the horse comfortable in his new stall. She'd cushioned the floor with extra bedding and hung a hay net within easy reach, though Dr. Chen had warned she could only offer small amounts at a time. Every few minutes she found herself checking on him, terrified he might collapse in the night. He needs a name, she murmured, more to herself than to her father, who had stayed to help her settle the horse. Something that fits who he could be, not what he looks like now. Jack watched his daughter, recognizing that this moment marked a turning point, not just for the horse, but for Emma herself. Sometimes the biggest dreams started with the smallest chances, and despite his concerns, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride in her unwavering determination. As Emma prepared for her first night as a horse owner, she had no way of knowing that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test every ounce of her strength, determination, and love. The real challenges, and the real miracles, still lay ahead. Dawn broke over the Sullivan farm with a gentle whisper of pink and gold across the sky. Emma had barely slept, checking on the horse every 2 hours throughout the night. Each time she'd approached his stall, she'd found him standing in exactly the same position, as if moving required more energy than he could spare. I think I'll call you Phoenix, she whispered during her early morning visit, measuring out the tiny portion of carefully soaked feed Dr. Chen had prescribed. The name had come to her sometime during the long night watches, a reminder that even from the ashes of despair, something magnificent could rise. Phoenix's rehabilitation began. With the smallest of steps, every 3 hours, Emma would prepare his carefully measured meals, a precise mixture of soaked beet pulp, senior feed, and supplements that Dr. Chen had detailed in a thick binder of instructions. At first, Phoenix would barely touch the food, turning his head away as if the very smell of it was foreign to him. "Come on, boy," Emma would encourage, holding the bucket closer. "Just a little bit." She'd stand there for hours if necessary, waiting patiently until he took even the smallest mouthful. Each bite was a victory, each swallow a step toward survival. Between feedings, Emma spent hours simply sitting in the stall with him, reading, aloud from her favorite books or quietly talking about her dreams. "We'll show them all," she'd say softly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle him. "But first, we need to get you strong again." The rest of the farm's routine continued around them. Jack would head out to tend the crops, casting worried glances at the barn where his daughter spent every free moment. Margaret would bring Emma meals, which often went cold as she focused on coaxing Phoenix to eat his own food. Even their elderly farm cat, Dusty, seemed to sense something special was happening, often curling up near the stall to watch the proceedings with sage-like wisdom in his yellow eyes. A week into Phoenix's rehabilitation, Dr. Chen returned for a follow-up visit. The examination was thorough, and Emma held her breath waiting for the verdict. "Well," the vet said finally, "his vital signs are stable, and he's taking in more nutrition than I expected at this stage. But—" She paused, running a hand along Phoenix's protruding ribs. "We're still walking a tightrope here. One setback could undo all this progress." Emma nodded, already well aware of the precarious nature of their situation. Her savings were dwindling rapidly, spent on specialized feed and medical supplies. She'd started doing extra chores for the neighbors, mucking stalls and helping with harvest work. Anything to earn money for Phoenix's care. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, one quiet afternoon. Emma was sitting in her usual spot in the corner of the stall, reading aloud from The Black Stallion, a choice that felt oddly appropriate given their circumstances. She'd been so absorbed in the story that she hadn't noticed Phoenix moving until she felt a soft breath on her hair. Looking up slowly, she found him standing over her, his eyes showing the first real spark of interest she'd seen since bringing him home. "Hi there," she whispered, barely daring to breathe. With painstaking slowness, Phoenix lowered his head until his muzzle was inches from her hand. For several heartbeats, they remained frozen in this tableau. Then, ever so gently, he touched his nose to her palm. Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like moving mountains. This wasn't just a horse accepting food or tolerating human presence. This was Phoenix choosing to make contact, choosing to trust. The days that followed brought more small victories. Phoenix began nickering softly when Emma entered the barn, his ears pricking forward at the sound of her voice. He started finishing his meals more consistently, though Emma still had to space them out carefully throughout the day. Dr. Chen's feeding program was strict. Too much too soon could be as dangerous as not eating at all. Emma's mother, watching her daughter's dedication, began leaving teenage magazines and social media notifications unmentioned. The homecoming dance came and went without Emma showing any interest, her world now centered entirely on the quiet moments in the barn where a broken spirit was slowly learning to trust again. One morning, about 3 weeks after Phoenix's arrival, Emma arrived at the barn to find him lying down in his stall. Her heart nearly stopped until she realized he was sleeping peacefully, the first time he'd felt secure enough to truly rest. She sat quietly, watching his sides rise and fall with each breath, noting how his coat was starting to show the first hints of shine returning. "You know," Jack said softly from behind her, making her jump slightly, "I owe you an apology." Emma turned to look at her father, questioning. "I thought you were in over your head with this one. Maybe you were, but—" He gestured to the peacefully sleeping horse. "Sometimes being in over your head is exactly where you need to be to learn how to swim." Emma smiled, understanding what her father wasn't saying, that he was proud of her, that he saw the value in what she was doing, even if it didn't make sense on paper. The road ahead was still long and uncertain. but something fundamental had shifted. Phoenix was no longer just a rescue project. He was becoming a partner, a friend, and perhaps, though, Emma hardly dared to think it yet, a miracle in the making. 2 months had passed since Phoenix's arrival at the Sullivan farm, and autumn's crisp mornings had given way to winter's first whispers. The transformation in Phoenix, though gradual, was becoming impossible to ignore. His coat, once dull and lifeless, had begun to gleam with health, the deep bay color rich and lustrous in the morning light. While still thin, his ribs were less prominent, muscle beginning to build where bones had jutted sharply before. Dr. Chen's latest visit had brought cautious optimism. "His blood work is showing remarkable improvement," she said, reviewing the results with Emma in the barn aisle. "And his weight gain, while slow, is steady and healthy." She paused, watching Phoenix standing quietly in his stall, his attention focused entirely on Emma. "But what impresses me most is his mental transformation. He's a different horse from the one you brought home." Indeed, Phoenix's eyes now held a spark that grew brighter each day. He would greet Emma with gentle nickers, his ears pricked forward attentively whenever she spoke. The fear that had once dominated his every reaction had begun to fade, replaced by a growing curiosity about his surroundings. One crisp December morning, Emma arrived at the barn to find Phoenix watching the neighbors' horses playing in their snow-covered pasture. Something about his posture, the arch of his neck, the way he tracked their movement, sparked an idea in Emma's mind. Following Dr. Chen's careful rehabilitation plan, they had been limited to hand-walking and basic groundwork. But maybe it was time for more. "What do you think, boy?" she asked softly, approaching his stall. "Ready to try something new?" Phoenix turned to her, pressing his velvet nose against her shoulder in what had become his characteristic greeting. Even this simple gesture showed how far they'd come, from a horse too traumatized to accept human touch to one who actively sought connection. Emma began their morning routine as usual, but today she added something new. After grooming Phoenix, until his coat shone, she brought out a long lead rope and, for the first time, a simple leather halter she'd saved up to buy. Previous attempts at equipment had triggered panic attacks, but today Phoenix lowered his head calmly, accepting the halter as if he'd worn one all his life. Leading him from the barn into the crisp morning air, Emma's heart swelled with pride at his steady, confident steps. They had worked for weeks just to reach this point, being able to walk calmly from the security of his stall. But today felt different. There was a new energy in Phoenix's stride, a lightness that hadn't been there before. Instead of their usual careful walk around the barn, Emma guided Phoenix toward the small round pen her father had helped her repair on weekends. It wasn't much, just a simple circle of wooden posts and rails, but it was secure and, more importantly, private. "Let's see what you can do," Emma whispered, unclipping the lead rope. For a moment, Phoenix stood still, seemingly uncertain without the connection to Emma. Then, as if remembering something long forgotten, he lifted his bow head, his nostrils flaring as he took in the cold morning air. What happened next took Emma's breath away. Phoenix began to move, first at a walk, then flowing into a trot that showed none of the weakness that had plagued him for so long. His movements were graceful, powerful, the ghost of champion bloodlines shining through the remnants of neglect. Emma stood transfixed as Phoenix explored his newfound freedom. Each stride seemed to carry him further from his painful past, his tail held high, his neck arched proudly. When he finally burst into a canter, Emma felt tears freezing on her cheeks in the winter air. This wasn't the broken horse from the auction. This was a phoenix rising from the ashes, every movement a declaration of rebirth. Unknown to Emma, her parents had heard the commotion and come to watch. Jack stood at the round pen fence, his expression a mixture of amazement and pride. "Would you look at that?" he breathed, watching Phoenix float across the ground with unexpected grace. "That's no kill pen horse. That's quality breeding right there." Margaret squeezed her husband's arm. "Maybe Emma saw what we couldn't." she said softly. Not what he was, but what he could be. After about 15 minutes, Phoenix slowed naturally, coming to a stop near Emma. His sides were heaving slightly. He was still far from peak condition, but his eyes were bright with a new awareness. When Emma approached, he met her halfway, dropping his head to her shoulder as if to say, "Did you see what I can do?" "I always knew you were special," Emma whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. The heat of his exercise-warmed body contrasted with the cold air, creating a misty halo around them both. That evening, Dr. Chen called after Emma sent her a video of Phoenix's breakthrough. "This changes things," she said, her voice excited. "That movement, that natural collection. Emma, I don't want to get your hopes up, but Phoenix's might move like that, not grade horses headed for slaughter. Whatever his past was, it wasn't always dark." Emma lay in bed that night, her mind racing with possibilities. She'd always dreamed of competing, of proving herself in the show ring, but now, watching Phoenix's natural talent emerge, those dreams were taking on new shape and substance. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about showing the world that second chances weren't just feel-good stories. They were opportunities for magic. As snow fell softly outside her window, Emma allowed herself to imagine what might be possible. Not just rehabilitation anymore, but real training. Not just survival, but triumph. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but today had shown her something crucial. Within Phoenix's healing body lived the heart of a champion, just waiting for the chance to shine. Spring arrived at the Sullivan farm, bringing with it new challenges and possibilities. Phoenix's transformation had continued steadily through the winter months, his once skeletal frame now filled out with lean muscle, his coat gleaming like polished mahogany in the morning sun. But it was his eyes that showed the most remarkable change. Bright and alert, they held none of the dull resignation that had marked him at the auction. One crisp March morning, Emma arrived at the barn to find an unexpected visitor. Sarah Chen wasn't there for a medical checkup this time. Instead, she was watching Phoenix move in the round pen with an intensity Emma had never seen before. "I've been doing some digging," Dr. Chen said without preamble, her eyes never leaving Phoenix's floating trot. Those movement patterns, the way he naturally collects himself, it kept nagging at me. So I reached out to some colleagues, showed them the videos you've been sending me. She paused, finally turning to face Emma. "There's a reason he moves like that. Phoenix isn't just any rescue horse. He's got warm blood breeding, maybe even competition bloodlines." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She'd suspected there was something special about Phoenix's natural grace, but hearing it confirmed by a professional was different. But how did he end up at a kill auction? Dr. Chen shook her head. That's the mystery. Horses like this don't just appear at local auctions. Someone paid good money for him once. The real question is, what are you going to do about it now? The question hung in the air between them. Emma had been so focused on rehabilitation that she'd barely allowed herself to think beyond it. But now, watching Phoenix move with such natural elegance, she felt the stirring of larger dreams. "He's ready for more structured training," Dr. Chen continued. "And as your vet, I can tell you he's physically capable of it now. But Emma," she placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, "if you're going to do this, you need to do it right. This isn't just about local shows anymore. A horse with his potential, you could go far, but it's going to take resources." Resources. The word hit Emma like a bucket of cold water. Their small farm's finances were already stretched thin. The specialized feed, veterinary care, and basic equipment had depleted her savings. Professional. Training would cost more than her family could afford. That evening, Emma called a family meeting at the kitchen table. Jack and Margaret listened as their daughter laid out everything Dr. Chen had told her, followed by a carefully prepared presentation of costs, training options, and potential outcomes. "I've been researching local trainers," Emma explained, spreading out printed pages of research. "Michelle Davidson at Riverside Stables. She's got experience with warm bloods, and she's worked with rescue cases before. She's willing to take Phoenix and me on as students, but Emma swallowed hard. The training fees are significant. Jack studied the numbers, his weathered face serious. That's more than we can manage, sweetheart. Even with the good harvest this year. I know, Emma interrupted. That's why I have a proposal. She pulled out another sheet of paper. The Davidson farm needs help with their younger horses and barn work. Michelle's offered to reduce the training fees if I work there part-time. I've also applied for a weekend job at the local tack shop, and I can pick up more hours once school lets out for summer. Margaret exchanged a look with her husband. What about college savings? Emma, we've been putting aside money for your education. I've thought about that too, Emma said quickly. There are several equestrian scholarship programs, with Phoenix's potential if we can get some show experience. She trailed off, seeing the concern in her parents' faces. I know it's a lot to ask, but this isn't just about me anymore. Phoenix deserves the chance to be everything he can be. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Finally, Jack spoke. You understand what you're asking for? This isn't just about money. It's your whole future you're betting on this horse. Emma met her father's gaze steadily. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards. You taught me that, Dad. When everyone said our farm was too small to survive, you didn't give up. You found a way. Jack sat back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Using my own words against me, huh? He looked at Margaret, who nodded almost imperceptibly. All right, we'll figure something out. But Emma, this is your dream. You'll have to work harder than you've ever worked before. The next morning, Emma arrived at the barn earlier than usual, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness. Phoenix greeted her with his usual gentle nicker, but today felt different. Today wasn't just another rehabilitation day. It was the first day of their new journey together. As she prepared him for their morning workout, Emma found herself talking softly to Phoenix, sharing her dreams. We're going to show them all, she whispered, running a brush over his gleaming coat. Everyone who said you weren't worth saving, everyone who thinks dreams are just for people with money, we'll prove them wrong. Phoenix turned his head to look at her, his eyes bright with trust and intelligence. In that moment, Emma felt the weight of her decision, the responsibility of holding not just her own dreams, but Phoenix's second chance at life. The path ahead would be challenging, requiring sacrifices from her entire family. But looking into those eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that it would be worth it. As the sun rose higher over the farm, Emma led Phoenix to the round pen for their last informal training session. Tomorrow, they would begin their journey into the world of serious competition. But for now, watching Phoenix move with his newfound confidence and grace, Emma allowed herself to dream of the possibilities that lay ahead. Training with Michelle Davidson proved more challenging than Emma had imagined. The elegant riverside stables, with its manicured arenas and pristine barn aisles, was a far cry from the Sullivans' modest farm. Each morning began before dawn, as Emma balanced her new responsibilities with her regular farm chores and schoolwork. Straighten your shoulders, Michelle called from the center of the arena, her trained eye catching every imperfection. He's responding to your tension. Remember, everything you feel goes straight down those reins. It was their third week of training, and Emma's muscles ached from maintaining the precise position her new trainer demanded. Phoenix, too, was learning to adapt to a more structured program. While his natural talent was undeniable, years of neglect had left gaps in his basic training that needed to be filled. Some days were breakthroughs, moments when horse and rider moved as one, drawing gasps of appreciation from other riders. Other days were struggles, with Phoenix's past trauma surfacing in unexpected ways. He's got all the raw materials, Michelle commented one evening, as Emma cooled Phoenix out. But there's something holding him back. It's like he's afraid to fully extend himself, to really show what he can do. She paused, watching them thoughtfully. Have you considered entering the spring showcase? It's a smaller event, perfect for getting your feet wet in competition. Emma's heart jumped at the suggestion. The spring showcase was indeed small compared to rated shows, but it still attracted serious competitors from across the region. Are we ready? She asked, trying to keep the tremor of excitement from her voice. Michelle nodded slowly. Ready? Enough for the introductory divisions. It would be good experience for both of you. Sometimes you need a goal to push past those mental blocks. That night, Emma could hardly sleep, her mind racing with possibilities. The entry fees would strain her carefully budgeted savings, but the opportunity to prove Phoenix's worth in public was too important to pass up. Her parents, seeing her determination, agreed to help with the costs. The weeks leading up to the showcase were intense. Emma doubled her training efforts, arriving at Riverside Stables hours before school to work with Phoenix, then returning afterward for formal lessons. Michelle pushed them harder, refining their communication, working on precision and presence. Remember, she would say, it's not just about the movements. It's about showing the world who you are, who he is. Every moment in that arena is a statement. The morning of the spring showcase dawned clear and cool. Emma had barely slept, going over their test patterns in her mind throughout the night. Phoenix seemed to sense the importance of the day, standing perfectly still as she braided his mane with trembling fingers. The showcase grounds were bustling when they arrived. Gleaming horses moved between warm-up rings, their riders resplendent in show attire. Emma felt suddenly conscious of her second-hand show coat and borrowed boots. Phoenix, however, drew admiring glances, his transformation from the skeletal rescue case to the gleaming athlete complete. As they walked toward the warm-up ring, Emma overheard snippets of conversation that made her stomach clench. That's the rescue horse, one rider whispered to another. From a kill pen, can you imagine? Bold choice for a show horse. The words were tinged with skepticism, maybe even mockery. Michelle appeared at Emma's elbow, her presence steady and reassuring. Don't listen to them. Focus on your horse, your preparation. Nothing else matters once you're in that ring. The warm-up ring was chaotic, filled with nervous horses and tense riders. Phoenix's ears flicked back and forth, taking in the unfamiliar environment. For a moment, Emma felt him tense beneath her, his old fears threatening to surface. She leaned forward, speaking softly near his ear, reminding him of how far they'd come. Their division was called all too soon. As they entered the competition arena, Emma's heart thundered in her chest. The judges' booth loomed at one end, 3 serious faces prepared to evaluate their every move. The carefully groomed arena seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Number 147, Emma Sullivan riding Phoenix, the announcer's voice echoed across the grounds. This pair will be performing training level test 2. Time seemed to slow as they made their opening halt at center line. Emma took a deep breath, feeling Phoenix's solid presence beneath her. In that moment, all the doubts and whispers faded away. This was their chance to show everyone what they'd known all along, that sometimes the greatest potential lies in the most unexpected places. Their test began smoothly, Phoenix's natural grace shining through in the opening movements. But as they approached the canter transition near the judge's booth, disaster struck. A gust of wind caught a nearby banner, sending it flapping wildly. Phoenix froze, his past trauma surfacing in a moment of panic. Emma's heart stopped as she felt him begin to spin, ready to bolt. Everything they'd worked for hung in the balance. But instead of yielding to panic, she drew on months of building trust. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm right here. We've got this." For 3 eternal seconds, Phoenix trembled on the edge of flight. Then, slowly, he began to settle. Emma could feel him fighting his instincts, choosing to trust her instead of his fears. When they picked up the canter, it wasn't their most graceful transition. But to Emma, it was more beautiful than any perfectly executed movement could have been. They finished their test to scattered applause, most spectators unaware of the private victory they'd just witnessed. As they left the arena, Michelle was waiting, her expression unreadable. "That could have gone very differently," she said quietly. "What you two just did, that's worth more than any ribbon." Emma slid off Phoenix's back, hugging his neck as tears threatened to spill. They hadn't performed perfectly, probably. Wouldn't place high in the standings, but they'd faced their first real test together and emerged stronger. Sometimes, she realized, victory wasn't measured in points or placings, but in moments of trust and courage. The summer following their first show brought unexpected changes to Emma and Phoenix's world. Though they hadn't won any ribbons at the spring showcase, their story had caught the attention of local equestrian circles. The sight of Phoenix, gleaming and powerful, dancing through his movements with growing confidence, combined with whispers of his rescue background, created a buzz that neither Emma nor her family had anticipated. "Did you see the article in the Regional Equestrian Digest?" Michelle asked one morning, holding up a magazine during their lesson. There, on page 23, was a small feature about Phoenix, complete with before and after photos. The contrast was striking, the skeletal, desperate horse from the IA, auctioned beside an image of him now, muscled and proud, his coat gleaming like polished copper in the morning sun. The attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Several local businesses offered sponsorship deals. A feed company wanted Phoenix as their success story, while a tack shop proposed providing equipment in exchange for promotional appearances. It was more than Emma had ever dreamed of, but it also meant increased pressure and scrutiny. "You need to be careful," Michelle warned during a private conversation. "Success brings complications. People will start watching every move you make, and not all of them will be supportive." Her words proved prophetic when Emma overheard two competitors at their next show. "It's just a publicity stunt," one said dismissively. "Everyone loves a rescue story, but that horse will never compete at the higher levels." "You can't erase bad breeding and poor start with a few months of proper care." Emma felt her cheeks burn, but Phoenix's gentle nickering drew her attention back to what mattered. He had pressed his head against her shoulder, his dark eyes full of trust and affection. In that moment, she realized that other people's opinions mattered far less than the bond they shared. Their training intensified as summer progressed. Michelle, seeing their potential, began pushing them toward more challenging movements. Phoenix's natural talent blossomed under the structured program, though there were still moments when his past trauma surfaced unexpectedly. One particularly memorable morning, they were working on extending Phoenix's trot, a movement that required him to stretch out his stride while maintaining perfect balance. As he began to truly extend, reaching forward with newfound confidence, a truck backfired in the distance. Phoenix stopped dead, trembling, old fears flooding back. But this time was different. Instead of the panic that would have gripped him months ago, Phoenix looked to Emma for reassurance. She could feel him fighting his instincts, choosing trust over fear. When they resumed work 5 minutes later, he performed the extension perfectly, as if determined to prove that his past wouldn't define his future. "That right there," Michelle said softly, "is why this horse is special. It's not just his movement or his breeding, it's his heart." The transformation in their lives extended beyond the arena. Emma's weekends were now filled with clinics and shows, her weekdays split between school, training, and her work at both Riverside Stables and the tack shop. Her old friends noticed the change, some supportive, others less so. "You never have time for anything anymore," her best friend Sarah commented one day. "It's all about Phoenix." There was hurt in her voice, and Emma realized that success, even modest success, came with personal costs, yet the rewards made every sacrifice worthwhile. Watching Phoenix grow stronger and more confident each day, seeing him overcome his fears and embrace his potential, it filled Emma with a sense of purpose she'd never known before. The long hours, the physical exhaustion, The occasional lonely moments all faded when she saw the pride in Phoenix's bearing as he mastered a new movement. One evening, as Emma finished her barn chores at Riverside Stables, she found Michelle watching Phoenix in his stall. The trainer's expression was thoughtful, almost calculating. "He's ready for more," Michelle said without preamble. "The regional championships are coming up in 3 months. With focused preparation, you could be ready." Emma's heart skipped a beat. The regional championships were several levels above anything they'd attempted so far. The competition would be fierce, the judging rigorous, and the pressure intense. "Do you really think we're ready?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Michelle turned to face her, her expression serious. "I think you're ready to try. But Emma, you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't like the local shows. You'll be up against riders who've been competing their whole lives, on horses that cost more than most people's homes. Are you prepared for that kind of pressure?" Looking at Phoenix, Emma remembered the scared, broken horse from the auction. He had faced his fears and emerged stronger. Perhaps it was time for her to do the same. "We've already beaten the odds once," she said quietly. "Why not try again?" Michelle nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. "All right then, starting. Tomorrow we intensify everything. No more playing it safe. If you're going to do this, you're going to do it right." As Emma drove home that evening, her mind raced with possibilities. The regional championships would require more than they'd ever given. More training, more dedication, more heart. But looking in her rearview mirror at Phoenix's familiar silhouette in the trailer behind her, she felt a surge of confidence. They had come so far from those first uncertain days, yet in many ways, their journey was just beginning. The spotlight was growing brighter, the stakes higher, but the foundation they'd built, a partnership forged through trust and perseverance, was stronger than any challenge that lay ahead. The weeks leading up to the regional championships brought unexpected attention to Riverside Stables. Word had spread about the rescued kill pen horse who was now competing at advanced levels, and Phoenix's story had caught the eye of several prominent figures in the equestrian world. What began as local interest had evolved into something much larger. One crisp autumn morning, as Emma arrived for their dawn training session, she found an unfamiliar luxury car parked outside the stable. Inside, she could hear Michelle's voice mixing with others she didn't recognize. As she approached Phoenix's stall, their conversation became clearer. "The potential is undeniable," a man's voice stated firmly. "With proper professional training and marketing, that horse could be worth 6 figures easily, maybe more." Emma froze, her heart suddenly pounding. They were talking about Phoenix. "Mr. Harrison is one of the most respected trainers on the East Coast," Michelle was saying, as Emma rounded the corner. 3 people stood in the barn aisle: Michelle, an elegantly dressed woman, and a distinguished-looking man in an expensive riding coat. "Ah, you must be Emma," the man said, extending his hand. "Robert Harrison. I've been following your progress with great interest." His smile was practiced, professional. "You've done a remarkable job with this horse, especially given your limited resources." The woman stepped forward. "I'm Victoria Blackwood," she introduced herself. "I represent several investors who are very interested in Phoenix's potential." She paused, her eyes calculating. "We'd like to make you an offer." Emma's mouth went dry as Victoria named a figure that made her head spin. It was more money than her family had ever seen. Enough to secure her college education and then some. The catch? Phoenix would go to Harrison's prestigious training facility in Wellington to be campaigned by professional riders. "Of course, you'd have visitation rights," Harrison added smoothly. "And we'd credit you with his early training. Think of the opportunities this would create for both of you. Phoenix would have access to the best care, the best training, the best competitions. And you, well, your future would be secure." Emma felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She looked at Michelle, hoping for guidance, but her trainer's face was carefully neutral. "Take time to think about it," Victoria advised, pulling out a business card. "This is a life-changing opportunity." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Emma went through their training routine mechanically, her mind churning with possibilities and doubts. Phoenix, sensing her distraction, worked extra hard to stay connected, occasionally pressing his nose against her shoulder as if to say, "I'm still here." That evening, Emma called a family meeting to discuss the offer. Her parents listened in stunned silence as she laid out the details. That's an incredible amount of money," her father finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "It would solve a lot of problems." He didn't need to elaborate. They all knew the farm had been struggling, and college expenses loomed on the horizon. "But it's not just about the money, is it?" her mother asked softly, watching Emma's face. Emma shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "They want to take him away. Put him with professional riders. Turn him into a marketing tool. He'd be just another investment to them." Her father sighed heavily. "Sometimes being an adult means making hard choices, sweetheart. Maybe this is what's best for everyone." Including Phoenix, professional training, top-level care. "But they don't know him," Emma burst out. "They don't understand what he's been through, what he needs." "When he gets scared, they won't know that he needs someone to just stand with him until he remembers he's safe. When he's proud of learning something new, they won't recognize that special look in his eyes." She stood up abruptly, needing to see Phoenix. Her parents exchanged glances but didn't try to stop her as she headed to the barn. Phoenix nickered softly as she approached his stall, his familiar greeting warming her heart. Emma slipped inside, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What should we do, boy?" she whispered. "They're offering you everything. The best of everything. Maybe I'm being selfish, wanting to keep you." Phoenix turned his head, gently lipping at her shoulder in his characteristic gesture of affection. In his dark eyes, Emma saw the same trust that had been growing since that first day at the auction. This wasn't just about training or competitions anymore. It was about a bond that had healed them both. The next morning, Emma arrived at Riverside Stables early. Victoria and Harrison were already there, clearly expecting a quick resolution. "I've thought about your offer," Emma began, her voice stronger than she expected. "And I'm grateful, I really am. But Phoenix isn't for sale." Harrison's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "Young lady, I don't think you understand what you're turning down. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Emma met his gaze steadily. "No, sir. Phoenix was my once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. When everyone else saw a broken-down rescue horse, I saw a partner. We've come too far together to separate now." "This is business," Victoria cut in smoothly. "Sentiment has no place in professional sports. Think about what's best for the horse." "I am," Emma replied. "Phoenix doesn't need Wellington or Grand Prix competitions. He needs what he has right here: love, trust, and someone who sees him for who he is, not what he could be worth." As if on cue, Phoenix chose that moment to hang his head over his stall door, nickering softly. Emma reached up to stroke his face, drawing strength from his presence. "Well," Harrison said stiffly, "I can see we're wasting our time here. Come, Victoria." As they turned to leave, he added over his shoulder, "I hope you don't come to regret this decision." Michelle, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "You know, they're not entirely wrong about the opportunities you're giving up." Emma nodded, still stroking Phoenix's velvet nose. "Maybe. But some things are worth more than money or fame. Phoenix taught me that." As she watched the expensive car pull away, Emma felt a mixture of relief and resolution. The regional championships still lay ahead, and they would face them together, not as investments or commodities, but as partners who had chosen each other when the world said they had nothing to offer. With the regional championships just weeks away, life at Riverside Stables took on a new intensity. Emma's decision to turn down Harrison's offer had sparked mixed reactions in the equestrian community. Some admired her loyalty, while others questioned her judgment. But for Emma and Phoenix, there was no time to dwell on others' opinions. They had work to do. Michelle had stepped up their training regimen significantly. "If we're going to do this our way," she declared one morning, "then we're going to do it right." Their sessions now began before dawn and often stretched into the evening, every movement scrutinized, every transition refined. "Again," Michelle called out as Emma and Phoenix worked on their flying changes, one of the most challenging movements they'd need to perform. "He's anticipating now. You need to be clearer with your aids." Sweat dripped down Emma's back, despite the cool autumn air. They'd been at this for hours, but Phoenix remained focused, his ears flicking back to catch her every cue. The physical demands were intense, but it was the mental preparation that proved most challenging. Michelle had started playing recordings of crowd noise during their training sessions, preparing them for the championship environment. The first time she did this, Phoenix nearly bolted, old fears surfacing at the unfamiliar sounds. "Stay with him," Michelle instructed calmly, as Emma fought to regain control. "Remember, you're his anchor. He needs to know you're confident even when he's not." Gradually, Phoenix began to accept the noise, learning to trust Emma's steady presence even in chaos. Dr. Chen had become a regular visitor, monitoring Phoenix's condition as they pushed toward their goal. "His physical transformation is remarkable," she commented during one checkup, running expert hands along his legs. "But watch for signs of mental fatigue. Horses like Phoenix with traumatic backgrounds sometimes have hidden limits." Emma took these warnings seriously. Between intensive training sessions, she made sure to give Phoenix quiet time, just the two of them in the peaceful morning light, grooming and bonding. During these moments, she would often talk to him about her hopes and fears. "We're not just doing this for us anymore," she whispered one morning, working a tangle from his mane. "We're doing it for every rescue horse that someone gave up on, every dream that seemed too big." Phoenix turned his head to nuzzle her shoulder, seeming to understand the weight of what lay ahead. The final weeks brought new challenges. Emma's school had agreed to let her study remotely, understanding the unique opportunity she was pursuing. Her parents helped however they could, her father building a raised platform by the arena to simulate mounting blocks at shows, her mother sewing last-minute repairs on Emma's show coat. One evening, as Emma reviewed video footage of their practice sessions, Michelle sat down beside her. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "most people thought I was crazy to support your decision to turn down Harrison's offer. Professional trainers, big-name sponsors, that's usually what dreams are made of in this sport." Emma kept her eyes on the video, watching Phoenix float across the screen. "But that wasn't our dream," she replied softly. Michelle smiled. "No, it wasn't. And that's why I think you might just surprise everyone at these championships. You and Phoenix, you're not riding for ribbons or recognition. You're riding for something bigger." The week before the championships brought final preparations. Every piece of equipment was checked and double-checked. Emma spent hours polishing her boots, cleaning her tack, and practicing her test patterns on foot. Phoenix seemed to sense the importance of what was coming, carrying himself with increasing pride during their training sessions. Then came the unexpected setback. 3 days before they were due to leave, Phoenix developed slight heat in his left front leg. Dr. Chen was called immediately, and the tense wait for her verdict felt like years to Emma. "It's minor," Dr. Chen finally announced after a thorough examination. "Probably just from the increased workload, but he'll need tomorrow off completely. Ice it tonight, and we'll reassess the day after." Emma felt her carefully laid plans crumbling. "But we need these last days of practice," she protested. "The championship is this weekend." Dr. Chen's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Sometimes the best preparation is knowing when to rest. Trust your training, Emma. One day off won't undo months of work." That night, Emma sat in Phoenix's stall, icing his leg as instructed. The quiet darkness of the barn gave her time to reflect on their journey, from that desperate day at the auction to this moment, on the brink of their biggest challenge yet. "Maybe this is a sign," she murmured to Phoenix, who dozed peacefully beside her. "A reminder that no matter what happens at the championships, you're still the same miracle to me. Still my Phoenix who rose from the ashes." The next days passed, in a blur of final preparations. Phoenix's leg improved with rest, just as Dr. Chen had predicted. Their last training session was kept light, just enough to maintain their connection and confidence. As Emma plaited Phoenix's mane the night before their departure, Michelle appeared at the stall door. "Early night tonight," she instructed. "Tomorrow we load at dawn. Remember, no matter what happens this weekend, you've already won the most important victory. You've shown that faith and love can transform lives." Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she finished the last plait, Phoenix turned to look at her, his eyes bright and trusting in the barn's dim light. In that moment, she knew that whatever challenges the championships might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, with unwavering faith in each other. The regional championship venue was a world away from their humble beginnings. Pristine white fences enclosed multiple arenas where horses worth small fortunes warmed up under crystal-clear autumn skies. Flags snapped in the brisk morning breeze, and the atmosphere crackled with nervous energy. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she unloaded Phoenix from their modest trailer, painfully aware of the luxury rigs surrounding them. Several competitors did double takes as they walked past, recognizing them from the recent publicity. "That's the rescue horse," she heard someone whisper, "the one that turned down Harrison's offer." Phoenix, however, carried himself with quiet dignity, his coat gleaming like burnished copper in the morning light. The past weeks of preparation showed in his muscled frame and confident bearing. Only those who knew him well might notice the slight tension in his movements, the way his ears constantly swiveled, taking in the unfamiliar environment. Michelle met them at their assigned warm-up area, her expression focused. "Remember our plan," she said, helping Emma adjust Phoenix's saddle. "Take extra time in the warm-up. Let him see everything. You're not just another competitor rushing through their routine. You're partners facing this together." As Emma mounted, she felt Phoenix gather himself beneath her, ready for whatever came next. They began their warm-up with simple walking exercises, letting him acclimate to the electric atmosphere. Other riders rushed past, some shooting skeptical glances their way, but Emma remained centered on Phoenix's rhythm, their connection. Then came the moment that threatened to derail everything. As they moved into their trot work, a camera flash went off nearby. Phoenix froze, memories of past trauma surfacing in an instant. Emma felt his muscles bunch, ready to bolt. "Stay with him," Michelle called quietly from the rail. "Breathe. Remember who you are together." Emma leaned forward slightly, running, a hand along Phoenix's neck. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "We've got this, just like at home." Gradually, she felt the tension leave his body as he chose trust over fear, just as he had so many times before. Their division was called all too soon. As they walked toward the main arena, Emma caught fragments of conversations from the growing crowd. Some spoke of their story with admiration, others with doubt. She forced herself to focus only on Phoenix's steady footfalls, the rhythm of their shared breathing. The grand arena seemed enormous, its perfectly groomed surface stretching out before them like an ocean. 5 judges sat in their booths, pens poised. The stands were packed with spectators, creating a low hum of anticipation. This was the moment they'd worked toward, dreamed of, fought for. Number 224, Emma Sullivan riding Phoenix, the announcer's voice boomed across the grounds. A combination that has captured attention across the equestrian world with their remarkable journey from rescue to championship contender. As they entered a day, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. The months of training, the early mornings, the endless repetitions, it all came down to these few minutes. Phoenix moved beneath. Her with the grace that had first hinted at his true potential, each step measured and proud. Their test began with an extended trot down the center line, a movement that showcased everything they'd become together. Phoenix's stride lengthened, his natural power combining with careful training to create something spectacular. A murmur ran through the crowd. Each movement flowed into the next, shoulder into half pass, collected canter to flying changes. Phoenix responded to Emma's lightest aids as if reading her mind. This wasn't just a dressage test anymore. It was a dance, a celebration of their journey from broken spirits to shining stars. Then came the moment that would be talked about long afterward. During their extended canter, the movement that had once triggered Phoenix's worst fears, a gust of wind sent several flags snapping wildly. Time seemed to slow as Phoenix hesitated, his old instincts warring with his training. Emma felt the collective breath of the audience, knowing they expected the rescue horse to fall apart. Instead, Phoenix gathered himself and pushed forward, with even greater determination. His extended canter became something extraordinary. Power and grace combined with an unbridled joy that brought tears to many eyes. As they came to their final halt, perfect stillness descended over the arena. For a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. Then the applause began, building from scattered claps to thunderous acclaim. Emma leaned forward to hug Phoenix's neck, no longer able to hold back her tears. They exited the arena to find Michelle waiting, her usually composed face showing raw emotion. That, she said simply, was magic. The scores, when they came, were higher than they dared to dream. Not enough for first place. They were, after all, competing against some of the finest horses and riders in the country. But their fourth-place finish, just missing the podium, sent shockwaves through the championship. "Incredible performance," one judge commented afterward, approaching their warm-up area. "That horse moves like a Grand Prix prospect." She paused, looking at Emma with respect. "Harrison was right about his potential, but I think he was wrong about how to achieve it. Sometimes the strongest partnerships come from the heart, not the wallet." As Emma cooled Phoenix out, walking him in slow circles, she felt a profound sense of completion. They hadn't won the championship, but they'd won something far more valuable. They'd proven that love, trust, and dedication could overcome any obstacle. That sometimes the greatest champions come from the most unlikely beginnings. Phoenix pressed his head against her shoulder in his characteristic gesture of affection, and Emma knew with absolute certainty that no ribbon or trophy could mean more than this moment. Standing together, having shown the world exactly who they were and what they could achieve. The days following the regional championships brought a whirlwind of changes that neither Emma nor her family could have anticipated. Their fourth-place finish, combined with the compelling story of their journey, had captured imaginations far beyond the equestrian world. Local news stations ran features about the rescue horse who had defied all odds, and social media buzzed with their story. "Your inbox is full of interview requests," Margaret told Emma over breakfast, scrolling through emails on her phone, "and the rescue organizations. They're asking if you'd consider being their spokesperson." The kitchen table was covered with newspapers, all featuring Phoenix's story. One headline read, "From kill pen to championship, a story of second chances." Emma sat quietly, processing the transformation in their lives. Just yesterday, a young girl had approached her at the barn, eyes shining with admiration. "I saw you at the championships," she'd said breathlessly. "You made me believe anything is possible." But the most profound changes weren't in the public. Recognition. They were in the quiet moments at the barn, where Phoenix now stood proud and confident in his stall, a far cry from the broken spirit they'd brought home from auction. His eyes, once dull with resignation, now sparkled with life and intelligence. Every movement spoke of a horse who knew his worth, who had found his place in the world. Dr. Chen's regular checkup visit turned emotional as she reviewed Phoenix's latest medical records. Looking at these, you wouldn't know this was the same. "Horse," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "His blood work is perfect, muscle development exceptional. But it's more than that. He's found his joy again. That's something no medical test can measure." Michelle, too, had noticed the deeper transformation. "You know what's remarkable?" she observed one morning during their training session. "He's not just performing movements anymore, he's expressing himself through them. That's rare even in horses that haven't faced trauma. It comes from absolute trust in their rider." The evidence of their impact began appearing in unexpected ways. The local kill pen where Phoenix's story had begun reported a surge in adoptions. People were looking at rescue horses differently, seeing potential where before they might have seen only problems. Robert Harrison himself made a surprising appearance at Riverside Stables about a week after the championships. Emma tensed when she saw him, remembering their last encounter, but his demeanor had changed. "I owe you an apology," he said, watching Phoenix move freely in the arena. "I was wrong about what makes a champion. Yes, this horse has extraordinary natural talent, but what you've achieved together, that's something money can't buy." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd like to offer you something different this time. Not to buy Phoenix, but to sponsor your continued training. No strings attached, no separation required." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, touched by the recognition of what she and Phoenix had built together. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "but we're doing okay on our own. Sometimes the harder path is the right one." Harrison nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "The offer stands, if you ever change your mind. Meanwhile, would you consider giving some clinics at my facility? There's a lot of riders who could learn from your approach to partnership with horses." The request sparked an idea that had been forming in Emma's mind. That evening, she shared her thoughts with her parents over dinner. "What if we expanded the farm?" she suggested. "Not just crops, but a small rescue and rehabilitation program. We could help other horses like Phoenix, give other riders the chance to build these kinds of partnerships." Jack and Margaret exchanged glances. "It would mean major changes," her father said slowly. "New facilities, more staff." But Emma could see the idea had caught his imagination. The farm had been struggling for years with traditional crops alone. "We've already got interested sponsors," Emma pointed out, "and Michelle's offered to help develop a training program. We could start small, maybe with just 2 or 3 rescue cases at a time." Her mother smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're not just thinking about horses anymore, are you? You're thinking about changing lives. Human and equine." The next morning, as Emma worked with Phoenix in the crisp autumn air, she felt the rightness of this new direction. Their championship performance hadn't been an ending. It was a beginning. Each collected trot, each balanced canter showed what was possible when faith and dedication combined with second chances. A small crowd had gathered at the arena fence watching them work. Emma recognized several faces, local riders, children from nearby farms, even a few people who had watched their championship ride. Phoenix seemed to sense their attention, carrying himself with extra flair as they moved through their exercises. "He's showing off," Michelle commented with a laugh. "Hard to believe this is the same horse who couldn't even walk straight 6 months ago." She paused, watching them complete a particularly challenging sequence. "You know, Emma, what you've created here goes beyond horsemanship. You've given people hope. In a world that often seems dominated by money and privilege, you've shown that dreams don't have price tags." As if to emphasize her words, Phoenix performed a perfect passage, a movement they hadn't even trained for yet, one that seemed to come from pure joy and connection. The watching crowd burst into spontaneous applause, but Emma barely heard them. She was lost in the moment, in the perfect harmony of 2 spirits who had found their purpose together. Later, cooling Phoenix out in the evening light, Emma reflected on how far they'd come. The frightened, broken horse from the auction had blossomed into a confident partner who inspired others. And she had grown too, from a girl with a dream to someone who could help others find and follow their own dreams. "We did it, boy," she whispered, pressing her face against his neck. Phoenix nickered softly, his breath warm against her hair. Together, they had proved that transformation wasn't just about physical change. It was about the rebirth of spirit, hope, and possibility. 1 year after their championship performance, the Sullivan farm had transformed almost beyond recognition. The once quiet property now buzzed with purposeful activity. Where empty fields had stretched behind the barn, new paddocks housed horses in various stages of rehabilitation. A modest indoor arena, funded by community support and sponsors, provided a year-round training space. Emma stood at the fence of Phoenix's favorite paddock, watching her beloved partner share his morning run with a newly rescued thoroughbred. The younger horse, still learning to trust after his own ordeal, seemed to draw confidence from Phoenix's steady presence. It was a scene that perfectly captured what their journey had created. Not just a single success story, but a ripple effect of hope and healing. "Remember when this was all just empty space?" Michelle asked, joining Emma at the fence. She now split her time between Riverside Stables and the Sullivan's rescue program, which they had named Phoenix Rising Equestrian Center. The name served as both tribute and promise, a reminder that from the darkest beginnings, extraordinary transformations were possible. The center had already helped rehabilitate and rehome 15 horses, each with their own story of transformation. More significantly, they'd created a program pairing rescue horses with young riders who, like Emma once had, dreamed of competing but lacked the resources for expensive show horses. "Watch this," Emma said softly, as Phoenix demonstrated his latest achievement. Without any obvious signal, he collected himself into a perfect passage, moving with the grace and presence of a born performer. The young thoroughbred beside him pricked his ears, attempting to mirror the movement. He's become quite the teacher. Indeed, Phoenix had found a new calling. While he and Emma still competed occasionally, their focus had shifted to something larger. They had discovered that Phoenix had a remarkable ability to help other traumatized horses recover their confidence. It was as if he remembered his own journey and knew exactly how to guide others through theirs. Local veterinarians now regularly referred challenging cases to them, knowing that the combination of Emma's patience and Phoenix's influence could work miracles. Dr. Chen had become a regular consultant, helping develop rehabilitation protocols that addressed both physical and emotional healing. "Did you see the article in International Equestrian Monthly?" Michelle asked, pulling out her tablet. The cover story featured a striking photo of Phoenix working with one of their rescue cases, accompanied by the headline, "The Phoenix Effect: How One Horse's Journey is Changing Equestrian Sport." The article detailed how their story had sparked a broader movement within the competitive horse world. Several major shows had added divisions specifically for rescue horses and their riders. More significantly, attitudes were shifting. Horses that might once have been dismissed as project cases were being given second looks by serious competitors. Even Robert Harrison, once skeptical of their methods, had become an unexpected ally. His prestigious training facility now included a rescue partnership program inspired by Phoenix's success. "Sometimes the greatest champions come from the most unexpected places," he had said in a recent interview. Emma and Phoenix taught us all that. But perhaps the most meaningful impact could be seen in the faces of the young riders who came to the center. Like 16-year-old Maria, who now worked with a rescued Andalusian cross named Storm. Emma watched them in their morning lesson, seeing echoes of her own journey in their growing partnership. "You know what the best part is?" Emma said to Michelle, as they watched Maria guide Storm through a particularly challenging exercise. "They're not just learning about riding, they're learning about belief in themselves and in their partners." Phoenix had made his way back to the fence, pressing his nose against Emma's shoulder in his familiar greeting. His coat still gleamed like burnished copper, though a few white hairs had begun to appear around his eyes, lending him an air of distinguished wisdom. His gaze, once haunted by fear, now held the calm confidence of a horse who knew his place in the world. The afternoon brought a film crew from a major documentary series working on a feature about second chances. As Emma watched Phoenix interact with the cameras, calm and dignified where once he would have trembled in fear, she felt the full weight of their journey. "What do you think made the difference?" the interviewer asked her. "Why did your story touch so many people?" Emma thought carefully before answering, running her hand along Phoenix's neck. "I think people saw themselves in our story," she said finally. "Everyone has moments where they feel overlooked or underestimated. Phoenix showed that those moments don't define you. It's what you do next that matters." Later that evening, as the sun set over the farm, Emma took Phoenix for a quiet ride, just the two of them, like in the early days. No cameras, no audience, no expectations. As they moved together in perfect harmony, she reflected on how far they'd come from that desperate day at the auction. They had done more than just prove the skeptics wrong. They had created something that would outlast them both. A legacy of hope, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating others, but from overcome our own fears and limitations. As if reading her thoughts, Phoenix performed one of his signature moves, a flowing, floating extended trot that seemed to defy gravity. Emma laughed with pure joy, remembering when such movements had seemed impossible. Now they were just one of the many miracles that had become everyday occurrences at Phoenix Rising. Their story had become legend in the equestrian world, but its true power lay in its continuing impact, in every rescued horse that found new purpose, in every rider who dared to dream bigger, in every person who looked at apparent limitations and saw possibilities instead. As they made their way back to the barn in the gathering dusk, Emma could hear the evening feed being prepared, the peaceful sounds of horses settling in for the night. This was their legacy, not just a single rescued horse who became a champion, but a living, growing testament to the power of faith, love, and second chances. "We did good, boy," Emma whispered to Phoenix as she put him up for the night. He pressed his forehead against hers, and in that moment, as in so many before, she knew that sometimes the greatest miracles start with a single act of faith, and the courage to see beyond what others claim is impossible.